recognize it, and then I got to hit go live there. Let's see if it lets me do it. There we go. Mute it. Go live. There we are. Look at that. It worked. All right. Well, for whoever ends up joining, apologies for the time difference, or the time issue, I should say, the time zone issue. Daylight savings, I don't know why we do it still. I really don't.
British Columbia
I
just
don't.
got rid of it where I am in Canada.
What's that?
British Columbia just got rid of it where
Oh,
I am
did
in
they? I
Canada.
mean, there's a couple of states I think that just did. Arizona hasn't had it for a while where I am, and I think Hawaii is maybe another one that hasn't done it. I can't remember. There's a couple of states, um, but yeah, it's ridiculous. And then anyway, we don't need to complain about that. So, Ryan, hi.
Mike, hi.
We're gonna talk about qualitative research today.
Yep.
Um, so where I think I want to start is there we go. Some people are joining. It's
Hi,
working.
buddy.
Um, so where I want to start us off, I think, is I'll kind of maybe set the stage
Okay.
with there are a number of situations that I walk into with prospective clients. And even during the sales process, I'll start talking about and asking about, hey, how well do you understand your current, ideal clients? Like, have you defined what your ICP is? Do you understand what they need? Things like that.
Okay.
And um, almost unequivocally, the answer is like, yeah, we really understand our target really well. Okay. Um, and once I get into it, very often I find that it's not that they don't understand them completely. It's that the picture has a lot of holes in it. And the holes are for a variety of reasons. It could be
Mm-hmm.
because they are operating on outdated assumptions. So, a common one is like the types of firms I work with, they are people who've come from industry, right? So they were, whatever VPs, executives, directors in larger firms in whatever vertical they're in, whatever it could be energy, could be banking, could be life sciences, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then they start a firm. And now they are, oftentimes by the time I'm working with them, they're 5 to 10 years in, right? So they have the assumptions they had from when they were on the other side. And then they'll also, over time have obviously they've spoken to clients, they've worked with clients. So they feel like just by doing the work and having conversations, plus what they know from the other side, they have a good picture of what's going on and what's needed. And in reality, that's not bad. That's a good base, but there are a ton of holes, right? It's the information is often old. The information you get from clients during the work is biased and limited. Um, so let's maybe start there. Is
Okay.
why? Let me ask you this question: why do you think people are so confident about their knowledge of their ideal buyers when they clearly shouldn't be as confident as they are?
Because they're human. I mean, there's a lot of. Well, first off, thanks for having me. I'm glad that I get to chat about this. I think there's a lot of reasons. Most of it comes down to the reasons we get confident about a lot of things. Humans, by nature, are often overconfident.
Yep.
Um, there's I have notes here I prepared, so I might just pull from because I always want to make sure that I'm sort of on point, right? So things would be like illusory truth effect is a bias that I've written about before. And that's basically like when things are repeated, they start to feel true.
Yeah.
Our memory reconstructs things. So a lot of people don't really understand how memory works because it's not necessarily a photograph, it's a reconstruction in the moment of a photograph that you're thinking about.
Yeah.
So our memories are malleable, so they are influenced by the present, based on emotions, based on actual things that are happening. Um, so that's a reason we often misremember where things came from, hindsight bias. So I think there's lots of reasons that people um, are overconfident. But I'm not, can't remember if was that exactly your question, or because I think yes, maybe
It's
two
just a
there.
good place to start. I think that, again, it's a common thing that I run into, and I know that you run into while
Yeah,
we're doing this work, is this kind of overconfidence. No, no, no. We know what they
yeah,
need. We know what they want. We know what's going on, right? And it's not that they they're completely wrong. It's
yeah,
that they are overconfident. Because of that, they are missing a lot of the gaps that actually exist.
yeah. I mean, so a lot of people talk about the curse of knowledge, and that's how I like to look at it. It's not so much that you know too much; it's that you sort of get focused on certain things.
Yeah.
Let me start with an anecdote, and then I'll tell you about like yeah some of the things that I hear from people. But and I'm going to talk to you about a software company. I know that's not who you work with primarily, but the foundations are the same, right? Of trying to understand buyers.
Mhm.
And it was a company I worked with where they had worked for massive ERP. So
Yeah.
think of like the largest ERP softwares, enterprise software you can think of. They'd worked for the company for 30 years. They go out, they build their own competitor to the product over a couple of years, and then when their non-compete lapses, they go to push into the market with they built their own website and so on. And I was working with someone who actually does very similar work to you, and they were experienced like you to know, okay, I'm reading this, but Spidey sense is telling me that this website they built on their own internal knowledge in the 29 years after they built the thing, something is off. So we found 5 people who they hypothesized were the ideal buyer. So on paper, if I showed you their product, their
Yeah.
thesis is that you would be in the consideration set. You should be interested in buying this piece of software. So we showed it to the people like director of finance at Cisco, a massive wholesaler, and they looked at the website and they didn't get it, and they didn't understand why the product existed. Built by people who worked for in this industry for 29 years.
Yep.
So I just use that to illustrate sort of your point where this happens a lot, where we get pieces of things. And I think that happens for a bunch of reasons. One is the human nature, but one is the essence of business, where salespeople hear things and that becomes their guiding source of truth. People who serve for service based businesses, we have account managers or business development managers or whatever term, whatever title you have for them, they hear things and then those ideas sort of become their guiding lights, but that's not what's inside the brain of a buyer, where they might have actually started considering services years ago. I had someone just come back 3 years later
Yep.
recently. 3 years.
Mhm.
I interview buyers all day long. I've had people talk about, yeah, we've been evaluating change for 5 years and
Yep.
we still haven't made a
Yeah, I
change.
mean, especially in the enterprise setting, that's very common. Um,
So it's
yeah.
there's all sorts of things that are happening in the minds of buyers and in markets that are outside of the business. But and if you don't know, you may not know what they are, but they're impacting you. So you have to understand what these forces are, and that's I think some of the reasons why I think this stuff happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, couple things. One is I very commonly see and hear working with clients, because a lot of the firms that I work with sell to enterprise buyers. They
Yep,
sell services to enterprise buyers, and it's very common
absolutely.
where they'll pitch something, and very often the project just gets killed. They stick with the status quo. They decide not to move forward. Budget doesn't get approved. Whatever.
Mhm.
and 4 or 5 years later they come back around like, hey, now we're ready. Like that's a very, very common thing. Now, here's the fun part there is, well, 4 to 5 years later, the market has changed, right? So the reason that they were potentially going to do it last time is not necessarily the reason they're going to do it this time, right? And
Yeah.
like having an understanding that is critical, right? So just because you thought you understood them then doesn't mean you understand them anymore. Like that's those are some of the gaps that I kind of see pretty consistently. Um, you know, a common one also, a common issue I would say is I'll kind of tell the story is I was working with a firm where um, kind of walking in right away um, they were doing the hourly time and materials model, and pretty quickly after as I started working with them, I had a similar kind of to you where you had the hunch about the website. I had a hunch like, hey, this is probably part of the problem. It wasn't the whole problem, but it was part of the problem. And when I brought that
Mhm.
up initially, like, oh no, 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 no. Our buyers are used to buying things this way, procurement's used to buying this way. Like it has to be this way. Okay, fine. Lo and behold, when we interviewed prospective buyers, um, one of the things we asked is, well, what are the, you know, I got at the question a couple of different ways. One is sort of like, you know, asking them what they've purchased in the past and how they what they thought about the model, what the issues were, you know, things like that, and then also
Mhm.
asking about, you know, how do you kind of evaluate, you know, ROI from a you know a model perspective in terms of how much you're going to pay and when you're going to pay and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And overall, what we got to is actually some level of performance based is what they want and they can't get it. And interestingly, yeah, procurement fights it because it's hard for them to compare, but the actual decision makers prefer some sort of at least part performance based model.
Okay.
So, right, like same kind of thing. Like they have this, the buyer has this idea where, and again, in their case, it was exactly what I talked about. They were on the other side. They used to buy this stuff, but they were buying it
Mhm.
10 years ago before they started the firm, where pretty much anything other than time and materials was very much unheard of in pretty much all of professional services.
Yeah. Things around them have changed.
Right. And they would never have, they still fought it, by the way. They're like, well, no, 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 that can't be right. I'm like, well, like we can do more interviews if you'd like.
Yeah.
And in that case, they actually agreed that we did more
And
interviews,
that
and that's
happens.
exactly what
Sometimes
happened.
people still
Yeah,
see feedback from the market, and they'll still. It's hard for
yeah,
them to move
it is.
past what they've entrenched their line of thought
Yeah,
into.
well, it especially as a again, the folks I work with, they're generally the founders of these firms, and for them, that means admitting that they're wrong, right? And
Hmm.
that's a hard thing for anybody to do.
Yeah.
Let's, you know, you talked about, you mentioned kind of parts of the whole truth. Um, let's talk about the different options that people have, right?
Okay.
And kind of talk about the various limitations that exist and what people can realistically expect to get from each of them. So I'll kind of call a few things out and then we can just tackle them one by one.
Sure.
You know, a really common one, and you know, you mentioned SaaS. I know you work a lot with a lot of SaaS companies.
Yeah.
Um, what is, you know, listening to sales calls, right?
Yep.
SaaS companies have had access to Gong or you know whatever the various competitors are to kind of listen to sales calls for I don't know 5, 6 plus years. I don't can't remember how long.
Yeah. Longer than
It's a
that.
little newer in the kind of boutique professional services space. It's been around, but
Mhm.
not as common. But now
Yeah. As soon
everybody's
as
got it,
note
right?
takers became a thing,
Yeah,
sort of everyone jumped on it.
everybody's got them. I mean, I haven't been. I can't remember the last sales call or the last call I've been on that did not have at least one note taker in it. So
Yeah. Absolutely. Yep.
they're pretty much ubiquitous at this point. Right. So everyone's got those. So you can listen to sales calls. You've got transcripts. Like everybody can analyze those. Generally, as long as you do decent work, everybody can talk to existing clients.
Hmm.
Right. They can reach out, schedule interviews, ask them questions, etc. Um, most firms have an account management function, at least, whether that's a formal account management function that's got actual account managers, or whether you have partners that are responsible for books of business, whatever it is. But uh,
Yep.
everybody can and should be, if they're doing their job well, reaching out and having conversations with clients outside of just existing client work, right?
Yep.
Or existing engagements, if you will. Then the next one down the list would be, okay, we're losing a decent amount of business. Let's try to talk to our closed lost and understand why. Try to understand why we're losing them. Right. That's another
Yeah.
common one. I can see you're smiling and laughing about that one. I think I know why, but we'll get into that. And then the very last one, which I would say for most organizations that I work with, isn't actually even thought about. And we can get into kind of why they don't think about doing this at all. I think some of them actually honestly think it's not possible. And we'll get
Mm-hmm.
into that in a second. But it's what you and I do together a lot, which is buyer research, which is
Yep.
getting. Uh, I don't want to use the word in market. I've used the word in market before, but they're not necessarily in the process of making a selection. So in market's maybe
Yeah.
not the right word, but they're buyers. They're prospective buyers. They're the ICP. They're the decision makers. The whatever that that have been defined, but are not customers. Right?
Yeah.
They
Not
don't have
necessarily.
exposure
They
to the
could be.
firm. They could be, but they don't. Ideally, at least the way I look at it is that they're not.
Yeah.
They don't have that. They don't have any preconceived notions. And usually, when I do them, I don't tell them who I'm doing the research for. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
You do a
They're asking,
blind.
hey, what do you think about company XYZ? Um, for the most part, the stuff that I do, at least. So
Yeah.
I named off five, I think, five or six.
Yeah.
I forget, I lost count. Partial sources of truth. Let's talk about the limitations and kind of what realistically you can expect from each of
Yeah. So sales calls, customers, close lost, and then buyer. So,
them. And then kind of the AM function as well. It's sort of like
oh,
that's clients, but I like to split that out because I think the the way the information is gathered is different and creates a different set of biases. I feel like.
okay. Yeah.
I
Maybe
don't know. You tell me
because
if
I might
I'm.
be interpreting.
You tell me if
No,
I'm
like
off.
I might. I don't know. I'd have to hear. We can talk about how you like defining the ones because I have my own definitions on how I look
Well,
at
so like
something.
again,
Right.
the two there's clients, meaning like we're gonna do formal client research, right? So I'm gonna reach out to my clients, say, hey, I would,
Mm-hmm.
kind of what you and I do together a lot, which is uh, we'd like to interview you about X, Y, and Z. Here's what we want to find out from you, and it's a formal interview, and it's usually done
Yes.
by a third party, ideally. We can talk
Yep.
about why that is versus the account management stuff. It's sort of it's ad hoc. Their account managers isn't reaching out necessarily going, hey, can I ask you? I mean, sometimes they could, like, let me ask you questions about pricing or whatever it is.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's more informal. Um,
Got it.
and again, it's the account manager themselves that's doing the conversation.
So like ask like sending an email or something like, hey, give me 3 answers to this question,
Yeah,
maybe.
well, it could be that, or again, a lot of the time it's just more of the information comes in, meaning like, hey, um, they literally you just call and be like, hey, do you have a few minutes? I'd love to talk about,
Got it.
XYZ
Yeah.
strategy, whatever. And it's sort of
Quick
like
check
ad
in.
hoc stuff that just kind of comes
Yeah.
in.
Check in.
Yeah.
So I mean, all those are good because how I look at them is that they're all pieces of a puzzle.
Mhm.
And they will give you different things based on different parameters. Sales calls are, when I was coming up in marketing, when I came back to B2B, right? Because I left the business world for a little bit, I entered journalism, then I came back. Like sales calls were considered like the gold standard, right? That's what the cool kids did. And
Yep.
I understood why. I mean, it makes a lot of sense because you sort of are a fly on the wall. When I was still in house a few years ago as a fractional, I joined the sales meetings
Mhm.
as a marketer because I want to understand how like things are getting discussed
Mhm.
in sales conversations. The challenge is sales calls by their nature are not research.
Mhm.
So the whole context and purpose of the discussion is to provide a buyer who might have already made up their mind about higher intent you know um, pieces of discussions or like forms of information, so pricing, scoping, onboarding, what does success look like, and so forth, right? Often is there sample bias involved because these are people that are more inclined to move towards something than they are not to. Moderator bias is a huge one because no salesperson runs a sales call the same way, and even coaches can say, "Oh, their system works." And I mean, I said a bit of a tongue in cheek. I mean, they're good, but it's not we by nature ask different questions, we discuss things in different ways, tone of voice, right? And humans will answer questions in certain ways. So you can't, it's hard to compare these things because of the nature of how they're done. So that's like their comparability issues. That said, they're good for like very high emotional language, really high level view of the pain points.
Mhm.
But would you, here's how I like to look at people, would you bet your go to market on them? That's the lens through which you have to sort of look at these things. Like, what is the
A lot of
risk
people do.
threshold?
That's the funny part. At least
And
in the
yeah,
SaaS space, I've definitely I
but
remember seeing
they
that.
do, but they probably don't ask themselves that question,
Mm,
right?
it's fair.
Especially if I'm devoting, let's just say 12 to 30% of my annual revenue onto a go to
Yeah.
market program, which I look at as sales and marketing combined and everything else
Yeah.
that's involved in that. I'm your average professional services firm. Am I willing to bet 30% of my annual revenue on a few sales calls? Ask yourselves that and
Mhm.
then sort of make a decision. Customer interviews are great because they get away from the moderator bias to an extent.
Especially
You
if you bring in
mentioned,
a third party to do it.
yeah, there's actually really good research that shows a moderator like I do it actually gets higher decision grade data and more reliable data because my biases aren't involved in the discussion. Some
Mhm.
people will still won't feel comfortable with that, and that's fine. I understand. Um, but if you're going to go talk to your customers separately in like a 45 to 60-minute discussion outside of the sales process, highly recommend you do that. And we could talk about methodologies. There's all sorts of different types of customer discovery methods. There's like
Yeah.
12 of them. Jobs to be done ain't the only one. Um, so we could, that's
It's a
definitely
good
key.
one, but not the only one. Yeah.
Not the only one. It's a good one. So um, I think check-ins with account managers are great. I mean, when I was in franchising back in the day, my account managers would check in every quarter, like a lot of good account AEs do, right? And they talk to me about problems. So what's going on? I was hearing about this. Is this affecting you? I think that's an important thing to sort of take temperature, but it's not a deep dive
Yeah.
like a customer interview would be. And then there's close lost and there's buyer, and I see them sort of in the same realm. Because the difference with customers is that they themselves can be biased because maybe recency bias, where they don't actually have a sense of what problems are existing
Mhm.
and shaping decisions in the market right now. Um, they have
They might also
desirability
not
bias.
remember exactly what was going on when they made the choice if they've been a customer for
Yeah,
whatever, say, 10 years or
social
something.
desirability bias is a big one. Humans love to make each other feel better
Mhm.
and compliment each other and not give bad news.
Yep.
It's just how we're wired. So customers often don't tell you some of the warts unless there's a major issue and they're not happy. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard to get like objective truth from them about,
Yep.
did they actually compare someone else to you and maybe you only want it for XYZ reasons that you're not aware of. So I like to use closed lost because or buyer interviews because to me they get to an objective truth or they fill those gaps. If we're going to use that same analogy, those they plug in the holes that you don't see, which is what are buyers thinking about when you're not in the room. And that's the key one because markets buyers make decisions before they get to a sales call for the
Mhm.
most part, and they're influenced by. And I like to use those types of data point or those type of people because, in my opinion, now they give some of the best feedback about how they think about a category of solutions, how they think about problems, what's impacting their business, and what would be true for them to actually work with a professional services firm,
Mhm.
many who they probably don't even know exist. Because
Yeah.
for a lot of professional services firms, it's new for the first time for many of these buyers. I imagine. Mike, tell
Mhm.
me if I'm wrong. Like maybe I'm wrong about that, but
With boutique firms, it's 100% true.
so
It's
you would have to understand like if they're encountering this for the first time, it's not like they're buying Salesforce, right? And it's something they're familiar with. What has to be true in their world for them to even want to type your name in the email or fill that form, right? A lot of things you
Yep.
talk about, like risk and trust and all that stuff. So to me, buyers unlock a lot of that. You can sort of glean it from customers and sales, but
Mhm.
like I said, that's not the intent of those conversations. Anyway, I went on a lot there,
Yeah.
so I'm going to stop. Let me know
No,
where you want to go
I
next.
thank you for the detail, and I agree with. Well, again, you and I work together, so I agree with pretty much everything you're talking about because that's why we work together. But outside of that, like I can validate a lot, like virtually all of it, with my own stories, right? Because I've done the work as well, where it does, like as an example with client interviews, it literally does not matter how you conduct the interview. At least doesn't seem to. I've done a bunch. How you conduct the interview. It doesn't matter whether, even if you tell me, like, hey, I'm not looking for feedback about, XYZ firm. That's not what this is about. I literally only care about this, this, and this.
Yeah.
Inevitably, every single time, or just about, maybe not every single time, call it 95% of the time, they will say, oh, yeah, um, blah, 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 blah. And they're just great because so and so did this and this and this. I'm like, that's fine. That has enough. That literally invalidates pretty much everything else you told me because you're basing that on your experience. And I was trying to ask you about the problem, right? Like I've
Mm,
literally had that where, like, hey, what was going on in your business, whatever. And they literally go, oh, well, it was this, this, and this, and Joe was so great, and da 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 da, and asked me this, that, and the other. I'm like, okay, well, all right. Now I
yep.
don't know how much you actually remembering of what was going on, or you're remembering what Joe asked you, and like it just completely messes with that entire thing.
Hmm.
So I definitely can tell you that. The I will say that I do think that closed lost and uh, non-customer buyers
Hmm.
are different in my mind because I still have seen what I would call some like recency bias and things like that come into play,
Yeah, I think that's
right?
fair.
So like that's where I like for me, I like using closed lost, for example. If I have a specific like a specific problem I'm trying to solve, like say pricing, right? I can use closed lost to understand, well, hey, when you chose to go with the other buyer, what impact did pricing have in your decision? How did you evaluate pricing from this one compared to the other one? I can ask those types of questions, and those are
Hmm.
very
Yeah,
specific and they make sense. And again, the recency there actually is valuable,
yeah,
versus say uh, not non-customer buyers, ones that, again, I specifically look for, like I want them to not have any exposure, like working with the people or the company,
yeah.
and then
I,
from them I can get a very different type of information, right? That's unbiased to who they've worked, whether they've worked with the
yep.
company in the
I'd
past or
agree with that. Yep. Yep.
not. So what would you like? What are some? Um, let's talk about. Let's do an easy one first. So
Sure.
oftentimes, again, I tend to work with pretty niche firms. So like,
Yeah.
it might be like nonprofit consulting for like arts organizations or something. It might be um, like life sciences, but for specific uh, uh, subset of firms, like or whatever they specialize in working with firms that like doing biotech and like cardiac and neuro stuff or whatever, like pretty
Hmm.
um, niche firms.
Hmm.
And when I talk to a lot of them and I bring them like, hey, we probably need to talk to these people. They're like, there's no way there's no way anyone's gonna talk to you. Like that's a very
Yeah.
common one, you know.
Yep.
Um, and I've had this anywhere from, or it's one of two things. One, it's either, well, there's no way anyone's gonna talk to you, or what are you possibly gonna find out that we don't already know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
That how are you gonna do this better than we could? Right? Those are two common objections.
Hmm.
Um, So, I mean, I've got my thoughts on that, but I'm curious on yours. Let's take that first one. Like, oh, there's no way anyone's going to talk to you. I mean, I know you and I have
Yeah.
talked to pretty much anybody and everybody, you know, under the sun in terms of seniority and
Yeah.
etc.
Let me sort of come at that another way. I just sort of back up.
Yeah.
Um, you know, my path to being a researcher, like that was not my plan. Um, I just sort of fell in love with research, qualitative research, in the last few years. How I started Content Lift was, and when I first talked years ago, it was customer research. That's where my
Mhm.
focus was, and it still is to an extent, because customer and market research I see is synonymous in many ways.
Mhm.
One of the things that was happening was the thing you just described, which was, um, I needed access to customers, and either people didn't believe we could get them or they could not get them.
Mhm.
And I ran a project again. I do a lot of software, but I have done service and professional
Mhm.
service firms that work with you, and I've worked with a few in my career. And I had a client once who the we were trying we were trying to interview their customers and get a sense of, at a high level, how they look at the market and the competitors and everything around them and how they use them to solve different problems. They had 60,000 users, right? Software company. They found 4 customers in 3 weeks for me to talk to. What I had been doing, though, over that time, is because I'd encountered that scenario, or I encountered an environment where we couldn't find someone, is using panel recruitment
Mhm.
services and panel recruitment marketplaces. A qualitative researcher who does this for a living with like large enterprise firms know these firms exist, but I came up the SMB side in B2B, and I didn't know a lot of these things existed.
Mhm.
I do now. So I started working with them to fill the gap. And now I work, there's at least 200 of them out there, and they all comes in different shapes and sizes. So I say all that because when people will tell you that, my response is, well, we can probably find them.
Mhm.
And for the most part, we do. So it's a matter of just understanding that there are options out there to find people who will participate in these conversations. What I think we have to make sure people understand is, this is a pay to play world. And it's,
Yep.
but how these people see it, because expert networks is another synonymous term. They see them as consulting calls. So
Mhm.
if I wanted to get, the VP of manufacturing at some type of XYZ mid market manufacturing firm, and they work on this, we can get them,
Yep.
right? It's just a matter of knowing where to go and the relationships these expert networks and panel providers
Mhm.
have, because they basically just have a digital Rolodex. And you give them the parameters of company, so firmographic, psychographic, who owns the problems that we want to address, which is the key one, and any other type of discerning information we can use to screen people to qualify them. So yeah, like you can find them. And
Mhm.
I'm running a bunch right now. I've run some for you in the
Mhm.
last few months, and I'm usually pretty confident we can find people
Mhm.
for small samples. And
Yeah.
you're not going to probably do large samples with some of these more
Mhm.
niche
Mhm.
environments, but you'll find them. And to your point, they'll tell you what they think about the options in front of them. They're
Oh
pretty
yeah.
candid.
It's I'll just throw some kind of firmographics, if you will, out there just for people to kind of get an idea, right? I mean, just recently, you and I worked on a project where we interviewed banking CFOs, like
Yep.
mid-tier regional banking CFOs, who are generally fairly conservative. No problem filling a sample size of, what do we do, 7, I think.
Yeah, we did.
Um, um, I've done engineering executives
Hmm.
for medtech and biotech. I've done um, uh, a, like consulting firm founders and agency founders
Hmm.
of small firms. I've done software engineering executives, QA engineers. What else have I done?
Food and beverage, I've done.
Yeah, I mean,
There's
you've done a bunch. I'm just thinking, like, literally
yeah,
the list just list just goes down. I'm trying to think of, and like very specific. So, another one we did was like in the happened. You mentioned ERP earlier. Was in the ERP
yeah,
space. Like, so
yeah.
we
That's
can
right.
get really really specific, and it is a matter of knowing who they are and how much are you willing to pay them to talk to you.
Yeah,
And it's not like, people might think it's crazy, but it's not exorbitant amounts. I mean, like the most expensive one I think I've ever done was like $1,600 per interview. You might think, oh
yeah.
my God,
For
that's
for
crazy.
that was the banking executives,
Yeah,
I
there's
think.
one other one that was in the price range before you and I had worked together. I remember
Okay,
doing, and
which it can
like,
be.
yeah, but
I
it's
had someone that wanted to interview Fortune 5,000
yeah.
CEOs,
Well, and
and
that's like, okay, how much money do you got?
pretty much $2,000 typically in a
Yeah,
conversation. But
yeah.
that said, I I ran a project recently for their professional services firms. They worked in project management.
Mhm.
This is outside of us working together. They were looking for project managers in large food and beverage manufacturing operations. Um, I think we started around $300,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. I
So
mean,
I mean, it's all relative because these were middle managers typically
mhm.
we wanted to speak to.
Yeah, it depends on the company size and where they are. I mean, I've done director level people for like 250, I
Yep.
think, in the past
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
for kind of in the manufacturing space. So it really depends. But I think the other thing is like, well, okay, great, you can find them, but what are they going to tell you? And it's pretty amazing. Like there's again a really recent one. One of the clients literally said like, I'm surprised how open they were with you. I'm like, you know, that's I think the first time I was doing it, I was kind of surprised as well. I mean, part of it is asking the right types of questions and getting them comfortable, I think is a big one.
Yep.
Um, I think a lot like tactically, if you will, uh, like, the more you can get them to tell you stories, the more open they're going to be because
Absolutely. Yep.
stories are, I mean, everybody likes to embellish stories anyway, and people like to tell a good story in general. And that generally involves telling you exactly what happened.
Hmm.
Versus if you ask, oh, what were you thinking about? And, oh, well, whatever. But like, tell me about a time where you did, or you thought about X, Y, Z, or when this happened, or whatever. Like, they're very open about it. Another interesting one actually also is finding like past employees or past executives
Yep.
because they're no longer bound by, oh, I don't want to say anything that's maybe going to somehow get back to my boss or the investors or whatever, right? Things like that. And it's amazing how even more open they are about what happened. Now, some of that you have to take with a grain of salt because are they potentially a disgruntled employee, things like that. But that's another one I've kind of found like you can get them to talk to you about pretty much anything.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, I find, and if we're going to use it as like an example of like filling the gaps to circle it back, they're the ones that tell you what happens at the beginning.
Yeah.
So to maybe come at it a different way, like when I do this work now, which is now the core primary focus of my work is talking to getting market analysis from buyers and their perceptions of things. It's all through the lens of the problems that the business wants to help address.
Yeah.
So, as an example, let's take this food and beverage one I just mentioned. Their key thesis was we see an opportunity to help food and beverage operations with the current conditions in regard to tariffs and other types of challenges of that nature. So the discussions were all about, tell me about what's happened with the increased tariffs. Tell me about what's going on in your business. What has been the impact on that? How are you trying to address those things that you just outlined as a challenge? What have you tried to do? What hasn't worked? Very jobs to be done. We mentioned that before, right? And the reason we get to that is that's the narrative that's spinning through their brain before they get into that conversation with you as the services firm to figure
Mhm.
out how you are actually going to help them. Or if you put something in front of them, they start to make the connection that this could be an option for me based on all those things that have been keeping me up at night over the last couple of weeks.
Yep.
That's why I like buyers.
Yeah, I think um, there's just there's a lot of things in general that you can get from buyers that you can't get from any of the other sources that we talked about.
Absolutely.
Um, the like some of the honesty, if you will, about kind of what was actually going on, things like that. Um, and also the recency thing is also an important one, right?
Yep.
Because a lot of people, the general thing is, well, with clients, let's talk to our best ones. Our best ones, they've probably been clients for 3, 4, 5 years. So they made the purchase decision 3, 4, 5 years ago. Well, that story is old. The picture they have in their brain that they're going to reconstruct through memory is old, right? And it's degraded, most likely to a certain extent.
Yep.
Versus what if I can talk to somebody that just made this exact same kind of purchase 6 months ago?
Yeah.
That's
100%.
very different, right? Now,
Yeah.
forget the fact that the market is probably different and the trends that are driving market, buying decisions are different today than they were 5 years ago. Excuse me. Um, but they just remember it better. It's fresher in their minds. They probably still remember like what they were skeptical about during the
Hmm.
conversation versus the
Yep.
person that made the decision 5 years ago probably is no longer remembers that. The which actually is important for anybody that's listening is if the assumptions that you're basing your go to market decisions and investments on right now are more than a few years old, you need to do this work because literally everything has changed over the last few years across the board. You get socioeconomically, macro, uh, technology, like all sorts of stuff has changed in terms of how people buy and why people buy and how they evaluate and all this kind of stuff. I mean, there's the core things probably are still there, but um, there's enough difference that I've seen that if you haven't done this work in a few years, or if you've never done it and you're basing it on kind of internal assumptions that you've kind of gathered over, a few years ago, then you need to do something because you're very likely missing pieces. Um, one of the common things that comes up is when like I feel like right now I'm getting like more and more people seem to be amenable to doing this work, and it seems to be because they've been stuck for a while and they're realizing that they need to do something to get unstuck. Um, Curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. There's a lot of reasons people come in mm, to work with me, I find. Some of it I wasn't expecting. We talked about this a bit
Mhm.
before. Maybe just to sort of like set the stage of like why what I think's maybe driving people in the beginning because they're they say stuck. And if this is like stuff I'm going to talk about now, it's just sort of like a composite of research over the past couple of decades. So, and it's very generalized. So take it all sort of with a grain of salt, but it's usually like a good sign that maybe you're stuck. So pipeline is probably trending down. Win rate is low. Low can mean different things, especially in
Mhm.
service-based businesses, which from my understanding have a higher win rate than like software businesses. But let's just say, you're 20% or below one of five deals, you might have some concerns there. Maybe if you have different sales rep, one is like killing it and another one isn't. Um, or sorry, inconsistent across all of them. If one's doing well, one's not. Usually, it's usually a sign of execution. But they're all doing poorly. Something's probably off. High no decision rates. Everyone's like gets sticker shock. Wrong ICPs coming in the pipeline. Whatever, right? Like those are things that you probably like. But what I find is often, and I wasn't expecting this when I was working, when I would do my own debriefs with people, how they often got stuck was the inability to make a decision.
Mhm.
And I didn't anticipate that when I was starting to do this work. But even if you go to my website now, you'll see a lot of there are things around we needed something to bring to leadership teams so we could end the debates. We needed something that um, um, was bulletproof for the board, what have you, right? We were about to invest in $2 million into a new segment, and we wanted to ensure that we couldn't get challenged in it in a way where we didn't have answers. Like those are all sorts of things that people are coming to me that I always thought, well, they just don't know everything. It's more about the whole premise of what you're talking about today, which is like the risk associated with you know not having the information you need to move the business forward and people being stuck that way. But I see all sorts of reasons people come in. They got the segment
Yeah.
wrong. They've built the wrong thing. I worked with um, a pharmaceutical consultant years ago, where they had a whole thesis on like how they wanted to build the practice. And when we went to interview people in pharma, he it's not that he was wrong. He was just like, this is where I'm going to lead with, but this is where the pain was. So when they went to go do any networking events, do any outreach, how they position like the value they bring, it would have been this huge disconnect, and they would have
Mhm.
sat there and like keep explaining what they do
Yep.
rather than zero in on the one thing that their potential clients like all were terrified about
Yep.
when it came to decisions in pharmaceutical
Yep.
companies. So it's just, yeah, like there's so many ways you can get stuck, but the only way you get unstuck is by like having all the tools to sort of move the thing forward. And it's just a long way of saying, I think what I do is paramount, but I can also concede that what I do isn't going to work for everybody at every stage. So
Mhm.
the more you can just incrementally move through the things that Mike and I talked about. So yeah, maybe you can't afford a full buyer research spectrum. At least try and get into conversations with your customers as a start. And then what you'll find is it opens up the door to your mindset around what you don't know and some of the assumptions you made and some of the ways that
Yeah.
um, you know maybe the team is getting stepping over themselves. All right.
Yeah.
I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I did. I think a couple of things. I think also understanding, kind of going back to what we talked about, understanding what information you can realistically glean from each of the different pieces, right? So, like,
Yeah.
again, as an example, I do still really like sales calls, but I find them extremely more useful once the buyer research and the positioning work based on the buyer research has been done. Because
Yeah.
now you can, like, I've seen that multiple times where once you've done that, then you can see, oh, well, yeah, we're falling off from this stage to this stage. And it's actually likely because we're not addressing this pain point, which we found out about through the buyer research, and now we can do that.
Yeah,
We can, tweak it and test it, whatever.
that's a good point.
But on its own, you probably wouldn't know that. You'll identify something, right? And then on the flip side, you can go, oh, yeah, and they seem to be describing it in this way. So now we can use these
Yeah,
words, right? Maybe some of it is also validation. Like, oh yeah, in the 5 buyer interviews that we did, they seem to use this language. I can now listen to whatever 300 sales call transcripts and see if that same type of language is being used. Yes,
yeah,
cool. That validates it, right? At a much bigger sample size. Things like
yep.
that can be really, really, really useful. One thing you mentioned, just as an aside, if all the sales reps or all the salespeople, business development people, etc., are struggling, then it's a problem. If one is doing well and the other one's an execution issue, I'll say that there's the caveat to that in the professional services space is a lot of the firms I work with, for example, are founder led, right? So where you have the founder and maybe like 2 or 3 partners or 4 partners, whatever, and what almost inevitably is the case. Um, some situation there's like uh, edge cases where it's not, but for the most part, the founder can sell. Like, doesn't matter what's going on. They can just do it.
Yeah.
Right? They're always going to be good because they're selling, especially if the company's still small enough and young enough. They're not just selling the company; they're selling themselves. It's a
Yeah.
different type of sale. There's nothing you can do about that,
Yeah,
right? So you have to be
I can see that.
careful with that. Where it's like, oh no, it's an execution issue. It's like it's actually very likely that if the founder is the only one that's being successful, it still is very likely there's a underlying,
Yeah. I
misunderstanding of the market and positioning and things like
the reason I
that.
mention it is that I think what I believe to be true now after a few years of doing
There's an
this
interesting
is
question that popped up.
yeah.
So
Oh,
let me. I'm in the LinkedIn chat. The question is, we might need to clarify this. Can buyer research be leveraged to build a pipeline of leads? For example, if the win rate is consistent or even up, but the lead volume is down, is this a tactic worth exploring?
okay. So the short answer is no,
let me just clarify.
but
Jessica, are you asking whether doing the interviews themselves can then be used to then reach out to these people and get them to talk to you from a sales perspective? Is that the question? There's a delay on LinkedIn, so I'll kind of wait for the
yeah.
response. But Ryan, I'll let you answer, and I have the same mindset in general.
So
It's a
yes and
no,
no.
but
It's a no
right,
but.
yeah.
So this I think is true across all spectrums. So I've been teaching the last 3 years. I've taught customer discovery to early stage startups here in Ottawa. So that's very like preliminary, validating a business model, and it's people who are doing product and services, consumer and B2B. And then there's what I do. If you look at all the data around, um, you know, trying to use it as a means of solicitation, it's going to falter. And one of the reasons is that we're all hypersensitive around solicitation. Think of it in your own life. Think of how many emails are unopened in your inbox now that look like solicitation. So the
Oh,
minute
okay. There's a clarification. Sorry.
okay,
She says no, just in general to learn where people go for information about services. In that
okay,
case,
so
yes, 100%.
yes, absolutely. But I still want to finish the point
Yeah. Yes.
because I have this in my FAQs because in my website because people ask this
Mhm.
inevitably. Here's the thing though, and this happens whether I'm doing, you know, like customer discovery, business validation work, or you know, I'm running. I will book people for companies like I book for you or other companies, or I run the qualitative research myself. I moderate all the discussions. If you do a very thorough job of trying to understand their life and their pain points and their challenges, I would say, anecdotally speaking, a third of the time, they will ask me, since I do blind research, and for people who aren't familiar, blind is I don't I don't tell
Mhm.
them who I represent. I'm just
Yep.
a researcher with content left. They will ask me, so who is it you're working for? I want to know. Like, are you building a new thing? What's going on?
Yeah.
Because I've piqued their curiosity. And that can happen in both those contexts. So that's why it's a no but.
Mhm.
But in the context of what this person just asked, to understand like where they go to learn,
Yep.
absolutely.
100%.
I think what's more important though, and this is something I believe to be true now, in the business world, there's only so many channels, right? And many of them are particular to the vertical or the profession. If when we start to like break them out, so events and conferences and forums and Reddit threads and so on. I think what's more important, because you can ask them, where do you go to get the real story? What are your
Mhm.
trusted source of information? Most of them will give you the same ones. I'm
Yep.
interviewing technical buyers right now, and they're all Reddit Gartner, Reddit Gartner, Reddit Gartner. Like it's almost identical. Like I could strip
Yep.
away the names and give you the same answers. What they care more about is, are you putting things into those channels that catch their
Yeah.
attention
Exactly.
and
I got a story, exact story about
yeah,
that
seem
where,
like it
yeah.
provides value for them and seems credible. So go ahead, tell me a
Yep.
story.
Yeah. It's not, I would say 100%. Um, I rarely even ask that question anymore because, like you said, you generally, you don't need to, you don't need to spend $1,500 for an interview or $500 for an interview or whatever to get that information.
Yeah.
You have that in other ways. It's a story I'll say is again one of the most recent ones, the banking executives, and um, I forget the line of questioning exactly, but somehow it came up that one of the places, this is a bank CFO, where he goes is he follows a particular person on X that it's like I think he said it's a private equity person. That's like obviously it's a hidden, like nobody knows it's a private equity person, but he just puts out like hot takes on kind of sell side stuff and whatever.
Okay.
And it was like I follow him because that's a way for me to get kind of unadulterated information I can't get anywhere else.
Interesting.
Right. So it's not about X. It's about what, and it's about who is it and what kind of information
Yeah.
are they putting out there that got somebody like
100%.
that interested to continuously follow. Right. So
Yeah,
it's
I agree.
100% what you're describing.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, like just kind of actually going back to the question here was, can be leveraged to build a pipeline. So really, it's hey, win rate is good, but our lead volume is down. I would be looking to do anything I can to understand, well, what is it that's creating that situation, right?
Yeah.
Most likely, you probably already know what's going on at a high level in the industry, right? So the question becomes, what are they? Um, trying to understand like what are the hesitations, what are the things that are decreasing budgets, how are they thinking about prioritization, like those are the questions I want to be asking so I know what to potentially put into the various channels that maybe gets more people into the funnel. And then
Abs
are
100%.
there things you can do to even further increase your win rate? Sure, your win rate is good, say it's 30%, could you get it to 35? What are the things that influence that, right? Like, so those are uh, those are the types of things I'd be looking to do with the research in that case.
Yeah, I like it.
All right. Ryan, we got a couple minutes. If anybody else has questions, throw them out. Looks like that's the main one that I wanted to tackle from the stuff that was
Yeah.
sent. Ryan, anything that we didn't talk about yet that you think is worth mentioning in the last couple of minutes here?
I mean, this stuff's, if you're not sure, right? Like I gave you some ideas of like how to measure like where you are. I like to always talk about like the fundamentals of research design. So this is a very like non-researchy take on what's the decision you need to make, what's the stake, the risks of this decision, what do we need to know to make the decisions, and the risk threshold, what's the evidence we need, what methodology is best suited, do we need directional evidence or decision grade? So it's like do we just need sort of a hot take, or do we need like a blueprint that we can, because it's a coin flip on the future of the business?
Yeah.
Who's the person? How many people? I always go through that because I work with very small samples because I don't. A lot of researchers will try to do really big sample sizes, and I don't think you necessarily need that in B2B. But if you're starting out, it's like new market entry. You don't know anything. You're thinking of a brand new service. What is the risk of that versus, okay,
Yeah.
well, we sort of know this space. We want to tweak an existing service. Those are different risk thresholds.
Mhm.
So that's why I like to think through these sort of
Well, that
markers
gets
for
into, sorry to
decisions,
interrupt, it
right?
gets into the kind of the known unknowns and unknown
Yeah,
unknowns. Like the
exactly.
the mix changes in those two situations, and I think
So
that's
there's
what
always
makes it.
very good reasons to work with, buyer research and things that I do. And sometimes you might not need it. What I want you to do is think through what are the scenarios or you think it'll make you a decision for the investments that you want to, put forth.
Yep.
I'll leave it there.
Awesome. I think that's a good place to wrap up. If anybody has any questions for either Ryan and I, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. We're both pretty
Yeah,
active. So,
absolutely. We are.
and
Thanks, Mike.
yeah, thank you, Ryan, and everybody else. We got another session coming up in, or not we. I have another session coming up in a couple of weeks. So, be here